Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and today's video topic is scrying. And that video topic has been picked by my YouTube members and patrons, so thank you for that. If you don't know yet, every single month my YouTube members and patrons get to suggest video topics or simply video formats that they would like to see, and they get to vote on their favorite. This time, scrying and different scrying techniques and tools won the popular vote, so that is what we are going to be talking about. First of all, I'm going to go into what scrying even is for anyone who hasn't heard the term. I don't think this is like a term that you use in like regular day-to-day life a lot, so you may not even know what scrying is. We will go into that first. Next up, I'm going to be talking about how I like to scry, and I think that's a pretty common way to do it. And lastly, I'm going to go into different scrying tools and techniques. Some of them are more expensive than others, some are very, very accessible, some are less accessible, but I think there's something in there for every single person. So let's get into it. Alright, so first of all, as promised, let's look at what scrying even is. Scrying, if you had to describe it very, very shortly, is a divination technique that works with, I would say, a deep meditative, maybe a light trance state. In this state, visions and other kinds of sensations are induced. And this can be done with different kinds of techniques and tools, which I will get into later. But what the common denominator between these is that you usually gaze upon something or into something. A lot of you will probably have heard of, for example, crystal ball gazing or scrying. There are a lot of different tools and techniques. Again, I will get into those later. The common denominator is you gaze upon something, you look at something. And that induces a kind of meditative trance-like state in which your psychic senses are opened up. And that can lead to, for example, you having visions or other kinds of sensations. A lot of times people expect to literally see something in or on the surface that they're looking at, but that's not always the case. This can be various different sensations. For me, for example, I don't usually necessarily see anything. Of course, as I already said, there are a lot of different tools and techniques, and depending on the tool or the technique, it will be slightly different, but I think most of them are pretty similar. What I will be talking about in this video is black mirror scrying, but for example, crystal ball scrying is very similar. A lot of different techniques basically have the same core idea. And that is, again, you gaze upon something. So with a black mirror, and that could be, for example, an obsidian mirror, if you're fancy, but if that's not accessible for you, I totally understand that because they are not cheap. You can also, for example, use a normal, regular, small mirror, like a hand mirror or something, and then paint it black. A lot of people do that, and that works just as well. So you don't necessarily have to get an expensive black obsidian mirror. You can also just customize your own black mirror. And in that case, you can customize it a lot because, of course, if you're painting it, you can, for example, put sigils or bind runes under the paint. You can do a lot with it. But that's not what this video is about. I want to talk about how I scry with a black mirror. So first of all, what I like to do is I like to set the mood or set the scene. This just helps me get into this meditative or trance state. If you are very skilled, you don't necessarily have to do that, but I find that a lot of people have an easier time going into a meditative state and even a light trance state. And it's just easier for a lot of people to open up and to relax when they have set the scene a little bit. For some of you, that might be by casting a circle. If you want to do that, you can do that. You don't have to though. What I personally like to do is, for example, light some incense. That can be simply some kind of relaxing incense like chamomile or lavender or something like that. But it could also be, for example, an incense blend or an incense stick that is specifically made to kind of open up your psychic senses or to help you get into a meditative state. Then of course a lot of people, me included, like to incorporate music. For me, music is one of the tools, or in general sound is one of the tools that makes it the most easy to switch between different states. So if I want to make myself a little bit more happy, I listen to happy music. And if I want to, for example, meditate, I listen to either meditative music, or I put on binaural beats, for example, or some drumming, something like that. So some kind of sound or soundscape usually helps a lot of people. And then one thing that I think personally is pretty important is to dim the light. I like to do it in the evening when it's already at least like halfway dark. Or you could also go into like a darker corner of your house or something like that. But of course you have to be undisturbed for some time there, because scrying is not necessarily the fastest technique. But it helps me a lot to be in a space with very, very dim light. Ideally, it is already dark outside and I only have like 1 or 2 small little, maybe table lamps turned on, and not like the big overhead lighting. And next up, I try to go into a meditative state, and that just gives me the right head start. As I already said, while you are scrying, kind of the point of it is that it's taking you into a deeper state to open yourself up for any visions or any sensations that might come up. But I like to kind of jumpstart the process by either meditating, for example, or by doing some breath work, or just something that at least relaxes me and gives me kind of a break from everyday life. Because what we really don't want is monkey brain while we're scrying. We want to be relaxed and we want to be as able as possible to shut out any like chatting in our brains. So I like to meditate personally, but you could also, again, as I said, put on like a soundscape that really relaxes you, or do some breathing exercises, do some yoga, really whatever helps you to relax and calm down and go into a light meditative state. And that is actually where we go into today's sponsor, because this video was kindly sponsored by Aura. If you know my videos, then you know that I am a huge Aura fan and that I'm doing a lot of collaborations with them because I genuinely really enjoy this app. So let's give it over to sponsor Bente for about a minute, and afterwards I will continue describing to you how I scry in a black mirror. Aura is a mindfulness and sleep app that has won the Best of Apple Award and is currently used by over 7 million people. It's a great all-in-one app for your sleep and well-being, with thousands of meditations, sleep stories and so much more, like cognitive behavioral therapy, life coaching and even breathwork. Aura's content is created by hundreds of expert coaches around the world. Its content is highly customizable, notifying you about content that has been picked specifically for you every single day. You can also create playlists of your favorite content and work on mood trackers and gratitude journals, which is a great way to track your results. At the moment, what I love most about Aura is the programs and challenges, because they help me stay on track with my daily meditations while also getting better at meditating every single day. Aura is basically like a Spotify for your mind and soul. Unlike on traditional apps that only give you a few coaches in a one-size-fits-all package, on Aura it is very, very easy to find a guide that resonates with you. So if you struggle with meditating daily, or if you want to enhance your meditation practice, then I challenge you to try it for 30 days. You can get started using Aura now completely for free on Aura's website by using my special link in the video description. The first 500 people using my link get a free 7-day trial and also exclusive 25% off. Again, thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring today's video. And now let us continue with scrying. So I assume you have now meditated or have done anything else that really relaxes you and brings you into this light meditative state. Now, the next thing I do is I set up a candle in front of me and I light that candle. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it personally helps me, this flickering of the candle, because what I do is I light the candle and then I set up my black mirror, which is about this size probably. And I set it up in a way that it reflects the flickering candle back to me. So I can see in the black mirror the flickering of the candlelight. And that flickering of the candle really personally helps me to go into an even deeper trance state. But again, you don't necessarily have to do that. And with different kinds of techniques, which again I will go into later, you won't even have to do that, because there's other cues like that, like visual cues. But I like to work with a candle, and of course, if you're fancy, you can make a special divination or scrying candle, maybe like a purple candle that you put some sigils or bind runes on, that you maybe anoint with a specific oil. But you don't have to do that, because in the end, it's mainly about the visual stimulation of this flickering candle. So I have this mirror in front of me, I am seeing the candle in the mirror, and now I am gazing. So that is literally the only thing I do. I look at this mirror and I try to relax. Relax. I try to shut off my brain. So for me, this is kind of a little bit like a meditation, because what we don't want is we don't want constant chattering in the back of our minds. I know this is not 100% avoidable. I have ADHD, trust me, I know that. Just try to always bring your attention back to what you're doing. Bring your attention back to this flickering candle flame and the reflection in the black mirror. But I'm trying not to focus on one specific thing too much, because what I really want is I want this light gaze. Like you're in a daydream a little bit, you know? I think a lot of us probably know this feeling where we're just looking at maybe like the tree outside moving a little bit, and we can feel our consciousness just shifting a little bit and drifting off. So we're not necessarily focused on literally the tree moving and looking at individual branches or leaves, but we're more so seeing the overall picture and just letting our mind shift a little bit. And that's what happens when you scry too. You don't necessarily look at the individual candle flame or on one specific thing that's reflected in the mirror, but you're seeing the entire picture. And what usually happens for me as well is that after some time, is that my eyes just automatically defocus. So it's not like I'm really focusing on this black mirror anymore. My eyes just defocus and my brain has just shifted a little bit. And that is what we're looking for. We're not looking for literally focusing on the mirror and trying to see something on the mirror, but we're trying to use this reflection in the mirror to get into a deeper meditative state so that our psychic senses are opening up. What a lot of people expect will happen with scrying is that they're looking at this black mirror and they're literally seeing something appear in the mirror. And for some people, that's true. For some people, it works that way. Kind of like if you are looking at clouds and you're seeing shapes in the clouds. Sometimes that works. But sometimes, for other people, scrying works entirely differently. I'm one of these people as well. Usually when I at least do black mirror scrying, I realize at some point, okay, my mind has shifted a little bit. I'm kind of in a trance state now, and I don't really see the black mirror anymore. The black mirror kind of shifts into kind of a black hole. I kind of feel like I'm just looking down a deep, dark black hole. I'm not really even giving much attention to the visuals anymore, because what happens is that I will either intuitively know the answer to my question, or I will hear something, sometimes. Happens very rarely, but it does happen. But I usually don't see anything in the black mirror. Again, this could be different for you. You could either literally see something physically on the physical mirror. You could also see something like a vision in your or with your inner eye. You could literally see just like shapes and colors just wafting through your vision. Anything like that could happen, but you could also hear something, you could just intuitively know something, you could feel something physically, you could feel something emotionally. What you really have to do is stay open to any kind of sensation that comes up, because what we're doing in the end is, again, we are opening up our psychic senses. We are trying to listen to whatever comes up, and that doesn't have to be visual, depending on your clairs and which of your psychic senses is the strongest and the most open. This is not necessarily visual, but it could also be something entirely different. So you really have to stay open to that. Oh, and by the way, if you want some more information on all of that psychic senses stuff, how to figure out which one is the strongest and anything like that, you can watch that video right here. But yeah, with that being said, that is how I scry in my black mirror. With some other techniques that will be very similar, with some other techniques though that will be different. And that is what we're going into now. As I already said, there are so many different scrying techniques and tools. Some are more expensive than others and some are more accessible than others. So for example, my black mirror, it is a black obsidian mirror, which I personally have because I owned a witchcraft shop and I sold those mirrors, so I just kept one. But I know these can be kind of expensive. They can be up to like 70, 80, 90 euros. So those are a perfect example of a more expensive tool, as are, for example, crystal balls. If you are looking for a crystal ball that is made entirely of naturally grown clear quartz, you will be in for multiple hundreds of euros depending on the size. That is probably the most expensive scrying tool, but luckily it doesn't have to be that fancy. If we're looking at, again, black mirrors, you don't have to use a black obsidian mirror. You can use a normal black mirror and paint it black. Easy. A lot of people do that. If you want to be even cheaper about it, you can get a black bowl, like a cereal bowl or something like that, that is black, and fill it with water. That works just as well as a black obsidian mirror does. So it really doesn't have to be that fancy. And if you're, for example, looking at crystal balls, there are different types of crystal balls. So of course there are these insanely expensive, big, 100% pure crystal or pure clear quartz crystal balls. But there are also mixed ones. So there are some that are like clear quartz mixed with glass. There are also lab-grown clear quartz crystal balls. That's a mouthful. Those are much more cheap and much more affordable than naturally grown ones. But you can also just as well get just a glass ball. That works just as well. Of course, this always depends on like the model of magic you work with. If you want to literally work with the spirit of clear quartz, then glass will not be the same. But if you're just looking for the outcome, then a glass ball works just as well as a clear quartz ball, in my personal opinion. Crystal balls will work just like a black mirror, so you can also put up a candle, for example, and then have that be reflected in the crystal ball, or you can put it up to some other light source or something that reflects in it, so this will be very similar. Talking about black mirrors, mirrors in general can be scried with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a black mirror. Basically, any reflective surface really works. Something like the backside of a spoon or something that warps the image a little bit. Then you basically also have the effect of the black mirror, where you know this is a reflection, but it's kind of warped and a little bit different. So this kind of helps me personally, at least, get into this meditative state. But in general, any reflective surface really works. And that includes water. Water is probably one of the most well-known scrying sources because they're so versatile. I already talked about water in a black bowl, but you can basically scry in any source of water. You could scry in the sea, especially when it's very still. You can scry in a lake, you can scry in a river, you can scry basically in any water source. And especially if the source of water is moving, like a river, for example, or just like a little stream or something, you have the big advantage that there's already movement on it. So this technique of using a candle, for example, to bring in some movement, you don't really need that because it's already moving. Then next up, you can also directly scry in fire. So some people scry with just looking at a candle flame. I personally find that a little bit challenging because the candle flame is usually kind of tiny. So if you are able to do it, for example, in a big campfire or something, or just like a barbecue or something like that, that is perfect. And you can either do it in the fire, like the literal fire itself, or in the embers. That is something that I'm also a big fan of, is making a big fire. Perfect if you're already having, for example, a bloat, if you're performing a bloat with a big fire, or you're making like a midsummer fire or something like that. And then afterwards, when the fire has burned down, you can scry in the embers. That's very fun. You can, of course, use the technique that I also use with a black mirror. But what a lot of people like to do here, especially with amber scrying, is that they're literally looking for shapes. So you are, again, gazing into it and just letting yourself go into this deeper meditative state. But instead of unfocusing your eyes and just letting any sensation pop up, a lot of people like to just gaze at the entire image and then wait for a shape or something to pop up. Kind of like you're doing with tea leaf reading or with coffee grounds reading, where you're also trying to relax and get into a deeper meditative state and then you're gazing upon it. and trying to look for shapes or symbols, for example, that you can then interpret. You can do the same thing with ambers, for example, or a bigger fire. Some people even do it with the candle flame itself. I think that's a little bit challenging. Again, because it's so small, but with a bigger fire, that works perfectly well. And this is also considered to be scrying, but in my opinion, this is a little bit different than the technique I use, for example, with the black mirror that I already went into. But this other technique of looking for symbols and shapes in something is very, very popular and can be done with a lot of different tools. Ambers and fire is just two of them, but you can totally do it, for example, in clouds. That's very, very popular. You can do it in smoke. You could even do it at a textured wall, literally. If you have these typical German Raufasertapeten, these typical like German textured walls, you can scry in those very, very easily, especially if you lay on the ground and look at the ceiling and you have a lot of space to look at. This is perfect to induce an altered state of consciousness, honestly. Something that is also very traditional that goes more into the water scrying direction is scrying in alcohol, so very, very high proof alcohol. In trolldom, for example, it is normal to scry in just a bowl of high proof alcohol. If you want to go into more of a looking for shapes and symbols direction with it, you can also either use like ink or milk or some kind of colored liquid substance that you made yourself and drop that into water, or also alcohol works too, and then look at the shapes that it forms. So this is kind of like smoke scrying because the shapes that it makes actually looks a lot like smoke. This is also very fun, especially if you are beginning to make your own scrying inks or scrying milks. That's very fun. Very, very fun. And actually, surprisingly simple. You can also make a kind of scrying ink with charcoal, for example. Charcoal in alcohol works pretty well, or just charcoal in water, but charcoal in alcohol is definitely more durable. And yeah, that being said, those are the techniques and tools that I could think of. But there are so many. You can, especially if you're doing the scrying technique where you're looking for shapes and symbols on something or in something, you can do that with so many things. You could literally look at a field and do it. It's a very, very creative thing. You can do it, I would say, wherever you are. So with that, scrying, in my opinion, is one of the most accessible divination techniques, and also one of the things, at least as far as I know, that has been practiced for the longest time. I would say scrying and augury are probably the divination techniques that have been used for a long time, because you literally don't even need any tools for it, which makes it extremely accessible. With that being said, thank you so much for my patrons and YouTube members for suggesting this topic, something that I hadn't covered before, and a very fun topic as well. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up, and ring the bell down below so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Make sure to also follow me on Instagram, because I have started to post a lot on there, especially fun little reels that I hope you're enjoying. So make sure to follow me there. And if you want to support this channel, which would be well appreciated, then of course check out my Patreon or my YouTube membership. And I will see you in another video. Bye!